Okay, good afternoon. Excellent to have you all back. Hope you all enjoyed your lunch. What I would like to do now is to introduce you to the afternoon session. So I would like to thank Nate Newsom, who's going to be our moderator. I'd like to thank Chris Larkey, Carl Summerfield, and Jeff Rogers for all being very willing to contribute to the panel this afternoon. And I'm very grateful for that. Thank you. Be very mindful, because this is a very fluid, last-minute panel. There's going to be a lot of discussion and debate with the audience, which I'd love you all to join in with. So it's perhaps not the usual, but I think we'll make best, and I'm looking forward to it. So I'll hand over now to Nate and to the panel if you'd like to take your seats.
I'll slide in.
All right. So, she said here, this is a little informal here. So as we were talking, we realized all of our panelists have a lot of experience about hardware and software, and we can kind of do this in a number of different ways. So we'll start by asking for a quick show of hands for your input on where you would like us to start. So would you rather, let's kind of start with discussing various hardware solutions or software? Pipeline, workflows and pipelines, things like that. So we'll do hard.
I was gonna say, can you give us an overview of what their, like, your panel is?
Yeah, we do.
Sure.
Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Is this, you can hear me all right? Yeah, okay. So I'm Kyle Summerfield. I'm the software developer at the Shell 3D Visualization Center at the University of Wyoming. So I end up interacting with a wide variety of software packages and trying to get them to a wide variety of hardware platforms. So, you know, if we're dealing with a Revit model or something out of the ARC suite or photogrammetry or a point cloud, I've got to figure out how to get that on whatever display they want it on. And I think we all are fairly similar in that respect, but I'll pass the mic down.
I'm Jeff Rogers. I'm here at IU with the Advanced Visualization Lab, and I pretty much do everything Kyle just said. I help people digitize objects, get those objects into particular pieces of hardware, whether it be for virtual reality or for some of the large scale displays that you'll be seeing later on today.
So I'm Chris Larkey from the Marquette Visualization Lab. Yeah, and I'd say the three things that, or one thing that the three of us have in common is that we all kind of have very similar roles at our respective universities. We deal with a lot of different packages, a lot of different problems. And so we kind of have like a lot of experience with a lot of different problems, which is a big contrast to the way the other faculty or graduate students spend their time just immersed in a single topic. So my role is primarily working in the VR lab, but I also tend to be like involved in other people's research projects. I do consultancies for other departments and other organizations. So it's different every day, really, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so we have a wide range of expertise here. So we want this to be as helpful for you as it can be. So go ahead and do that show of hands real quick. We'll see if anyone who wants would rather start with hardware, discussing many different hardware solutions. Raise hands. And all right, how about software? Everybody else? Okay.
Okay.
All right. So we can start off with talking about some of the challenges you guys have faced with some of these various projects bringing in different kinds of data sets, some of those kind of challenges.
You hit architecture.
Yeah, architecture, sure.
All right, we're going to do this. Okay, so we do a lot of architecture visualization. At our center, the speaker this morning who called in works with us pretty frequently. So that can be an extremely painful process. Most of those models come in from Revit. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Revit, but it generates a lot of excess geometry. It has all of these like, my understanding is that when they place a window, well, it comes with a sill, and it comes with the jamb that surrounds it, and it comes with a bunch of geometry to stick into the wall, and it has a little nice beveled bottom. That's very nice, but they generate that for every handrail, and every little stair has this extra lip, and so you have to go in and kind of fix everything up, make new UVs. The Revit uses a texture atlasing system that's similar to 3ds Max. And as Chris pointed out earlier when we were discussing it, there is a pipeline to get it out of there, but it's not, the UVs are just going to be massive relative to how they're going to be treated in Unity. So what I'm saying is it takes a lot of manual work to get the model ready for a device like the Cave. There are, however, some middleware solutions that have emerged, and I'll talk about one really quickly called Enscape. That's ENSCAPE. The nice thing about Enscape is that it's just a plugin for Revit. It's fairly affordable, and you can either click it right in Revit and it'll push it to the headset, or it can create an executable file that can be run without having Revit installed. The other key feature of that software suite that I point out is that it uses real-time ray tracing, even if you're not on a 20 series card, to accurately model light penetration at any time of year. So that's a nice feature for architects as well.
Same problem, Revit. People come to us all the time. They got a Revit model. They're beautiful, but getting them into VR is a pain in the butt. So we use a product similar to what Kyle was describing. Ours is called Prospect Pro. Same price too. I think you said $75 a seat per year.
Yes, 75, 100.
We're about $100 a seat per year on this software. And what it allows us to do, plug in for Revit, exports into a Prospect Pro file. Then we can take that Prospect profile and load it up and make a meeting out of it. So Kyle was in Wyoming, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm here in Indiana. We can meet together inside the same Revit file in the Prospect environment. The other thing that we liked about Prospect Pro, it also supports other packages that are hard to get to virtual reality. One of them is Rhino. I don't know if anybody does any modeling in Rhino, but it's a NURBS-based modeler. It's terrible going into VR. And then it also works with Navisworks, and it loads SketchUp natively, but not a big deal. And then you had a workflow.
Yeah, I kind of called it the hard way, which is what you're describing here, of taking an FBX, and sometimes I'll use a middle converter, like say the Autodesk FBX converter, or I'll use 3D Studio Max just as a converter to ultimately bring it into Blender first. And once it's in Blender, I do have some Python scripts that can solve some of the problems with all the little mesh parts. Mm-hmm. Like it can group materials. It can convert all those components on duplicated components into actual instances, which allows them all to be batched and culled properly. But again, I feel like, even though I'm using Python heavily, it's still a very manual way to do what some of these other packages do automatically. There's a new one that kind of is being pushed by Unity, I think PyX, and also Unity Reflect is sort of a new one that they just did some demos at their Copenhagen conference. And those are meant to be like an actual live link to a database serving CAD models, which seems like a good solution in the long run, because that way you preserve their interactivity. You can all do like the useful scheduling and cost analysis, material analysis that the engineers really like in Revit. So that's a better long-term plan.
I see a question.
I was going to ask a follow-up. There's a number of, or several tools like Conduit, TechViz, I think, that are designed to sort of VRize applications without taking you out of the native format and all the other tools that they have. So I was curious if any of the panelists have worked with those to sort of take a AutoCAD file and turn it into a VR experience without going through an export chain.
Yeah, I've used Conduit, and it's really fascinating, I think, because it almost, like, the way a normal program works is that you have your CPU that sends commands to the GPU to draw them. And Conduit isn't like a plugin for the software. It's almost like it intercepts the communication going to the GPU. And instead of drawing it locally on that GPU, you intercept it, process it, and then maybe if you want, you can send it out to like other network nodes. So in a sense, you're like hacking into the program on a pretty low level. And because of that, it's really wreaks havoc on a lot of the optimizations that the programs have done. Especially when it comes to like, say, screen space filtering, or if there's usually overlay GUIs all go in the wrong place. But when it works pretty well. But because it's such a weird hack, they kind of have to have specific support for specific programs, because every program has its own little quirks.
Or at least specific graphics libraries, right? Because if you have an interceptor that works for OpenGL, it might not work for other applications. We use Conduit pretty extensively at the Viz Center in Laramie. I think it's pretty slow to keep up with. Like, we can't update to the newest version of the Arc suite because it won't run on Conduit. So yeah.
Have you tried XDMX on Linux?
No.
It's sort of a dead project from the X11 days. I think it originally, I'd say it died maybe 2006 or so. But on Linux, your graphics are fundamentally a client and a server, right? So the idea is if you could make XDMX would be like a distributed multi-head where you can natively have a remote file server that's automatically split up amongst other VR systems. But because it's a low-level hack and it's kind of not maintained anymore, I was really hoping that once the Linux graphics stack switched over to Wayland, that something like that would come back. But I haven't seen that happen yet. But there was a time briefly where it worked beautifully.
Back to Conduit. Are you guys using Conduit to go to HMDs, or are you only using it to go to
In the cave.
Just
the cave.
Yeah, that's key, I think, here, because I don't know, does Conduit work with an HMD?
I believe that
I think we got somebody here who might have an answer.
I can speak to, I guess, to Conduit. I think one of the challenges is when you're dealing with interception, the most that you may get is get the data in the VR system, but does that give you the right experience? So you may have the geometry, you may have some of the drawing commands, but the challenge is really what is the right experience that you need to create? Is there other interactivity, more advanced navigation, more advanced use of the tracking system and other tools? And that's where there's a real challenge with the interception, because so much of the effort with interception is just to get anything to show up. You're intercepting all the low-level commands from an application that just has no knowledge about clusters, tracking, stereo, multiple views, and transporting that into the cave. It's a huge effort to try to track any change in an application version may completely change the way that the rendering happens, or change the graphics library that's used, and that's where interception when it works is a really nice first step, but interception often limits you from taking the second or third steps once you move on to more advanced interaction.
Well,
that's where we always had extensive challenges with kind of the development and maintenance of Conduit, because they're always changing and trying to respond to every change in every application it's supported. And so while it's a good first step, really, the question is what's the right virtual reality experience that you need, and then what kind of tools will replace? And that's where we're still, that's what it said, there's a lot of challenges from any application you try to do.
I like to say one thing about clustering, though, because for me, I almost view it as like an inherited problem. Because if you think back by the history of caves, invented in like 1990, that was before like multi-head, multi-display graphics cards really existed. Like dedicated GPUs didn't really exist around that time either. So the idea of having like, when you built a cave back then, you had to have one cluster node per display. And so we kind of built this infrastructure built around clustering. But nowadays, it's super easy to put multiple graphics cards in computers and on multiple displays. So the cave at my facility was originally built in 2013, and we built it a reasonably small number of nodes, of just one server node and then 5 render nodes, serving 10 displays. But nowadays, you could use something like, say, Christie Spider or something like that, or what we ended up ultimately replacing those render nodes with is just one big computer with 4 GPUs in them, and those 4 GPUs have 4 outputs each, and so you can run your entire cave off of one display. And not only does that increase your software compatibility because it's not really a cluster anymore, but it also got rid of our biggest performance bottleneck, which was just getting all the cluster nodes to synchronize with each other. So there are more times than I'm proud to admit that we just open up Firefox and just spread it out over the entire cave. And it's not immersive and it's not 3D, but the fact that we can just do it on the fly, or you can just download any non-VR game from Steam and just run it there. It's been great.
I probably don't need to rotate. So the other piece of software that was asked about is TechViz. And we had a demo of TechViz a number of years ago come in, and I was impressed with it. I got to play Doom 3 in the cave. That was a good day, but it's quite expensive. I don't know that I can really say much else about it because we didn't go with it.
Yeah, we tested it and we found it cost prohibitive for how often we would be using it.
Mm-hmm.
Me too, yeah.
What did you call it?
TechViz.
So maybe we can kind of shift gears here a little bit. You all talked about how you're using Unity pretty extensively in the process. Can you guys talk a little bit about some of how that's coming into your work?
I can start, yeah. Well, the good of Unity for our side has been a lot of people who are not technically minded have a much better chance of creating their own virtual reality worlds using Unity. So we have a lot of art students that can come in, they know how to 3D model, but they don't know how to program. We got a bunch of pre-canned stuff that we can give them and they can create their own environments. So it's expanded the number of people that can create VR from our student base. It's also been great for our team because it's fast and rapid prototyping of VR environment. It's also made us lazy compared to what we used to be. We don't know, I don't get as low level as I used to. Sometimes I go straight to Unity and I shouldn't be necessarily going straight to Unity. And then you're always at their whim, what they are going to do when they update the software. You know, we keep previous versions on purpose. I don't even trust their website. We download it and we store it, so this version for this project.
Yes, totally. We lock it in.
I
for
do
like
appreciate
years.
the hub for that reason.
Yeah, I just don't trust the hub.
Fair enough. Unity is obviously optimized to do certain things. And a lot of your talk this morning was about getting Unity to do things that it wasn't necessarily built to do, right? To optimize the number of verts you can display on screen at the expense of, having materials on those objects, for example. So there are a lot of workarounds like that where you're trying to get, it's the path of least resistance to get that data into the VR display, but it is optimized to do certain things. And it's not necessarily, it is necessarily not a high performance compute platform. But I don't think I would classify myself as nearly as technical as the other people on the panel. So for me, it's a huge blessing. It makes things a lot easier for me. It's easy to teach to my interns to some degree. And it also allows me to build editor extensions that make it truly accessible for clients who aren't going to learn C#. And I've been spending a lot of time doing that lately.
Well, one thing that also, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, but Marquette's also kind of unusual because we have a lot of student projects that are made in Unity, but we don't have say a gaming program, or we don't have a VR development curriculum at all. The way we do it is that if we have a graduate student that has a research project in VR, they kind of end up learning Unity on their own with just some assistance from me and their other colleagues. I feel like that limits the level of depth that students can get on the actual side of how Unity works. They are almost always engineering students, and so they do have programming backgrounds through computer science classes, and it's usually Java, not C#, but none of it is specifically trained on Unity. And so still Unity performs pretty well to allow them to be productive because they're not experts on it. It still works well either way. I have a hard time with them just dipping their toes into the art side too. So when we've tried stuff that's a little bit more complex or maybe a little bit more computer science heavy, then I feel like we're just not productive at all.
So we're in the same position. We don't have any kind of game design or VR track at the university. And while we have been talking about Unity as an accessible tool, it's also really complex. I'll have interns that stay with me for, 2-3 years, and they know a third of like what they could be doing with Unity probably by the time they leave. So that's another drawback to it. I don't think it's a drawback relative to anything else really. I don't know how simpler you could get and still have a fully featured development environment. But
well, we do have VR and gaming tracks. In fact, one of the instructors is sitting over there asking tough questions earlier. Our problem is our VR and gaming track up in Indianapolis, the instructors teach Unreal. And so we, years ago, said, no, we're going to do Unity, strictly Unity. We don't have the resources to learn both Unreal and Unity and learn them both. So a lot of those students, when they come to us, they're like, oh, can you teach me Unreal? Nope, we're a Unity shop. So
do they end up using like the blueprints?
yeah, they use
Okay.
blueprints.
Okay. Well, Playmaker is a
kids.
nice kind of, if you wanted to get them into Unity, Playmaker is it's a visual scripting interface. That's a way to simplify Unity for sure.
Back in Victoria, I have the same problem. The students have the culture. The previous professor on our gaming course was also Unreal professor. My question is, why did you change from Unreal to Unity? What was it?
We never chose Unreal. And there's nothing wrong with Unreal. A couple of reasons we didn't like Unreal. I believe Unity was first to support the Cave through third-party systems, Middle VR.
Yes,
I think that's what we use.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's one of the reasons Unity beat out Unreal. And Unreal is also, last time I used it, it hogs your system resources. So a student developing on a cheap laptop, you can do that with Unity, but with Unreal, if I recall, you had to go in and set some things. You had to manually tell it not to go over 30 frames per second. Otherwise, when you were using it, it acted like a game engine and it ate up all your system resources. So if you had Photoshop or something else in your system, it would just bog everything down.
This is highly subjective, but Unreal feels to me like a game engine that was designed to make first-person shooters and can do other things. And Unity feels a lot more generic in its tool set. Yes, back there.
I'm going to kind of float up to from a higher level view. You guys all have recipes that you're developing to solve specific problems at your specific institutions. Each one of you are all presenting kind of different flavors of ice cream. Here's chocolate here, strawberry here, vanilla here. Oh, we got to, is there any benefit that you guys can see to sort of gather together? I know that's kind of why we're here, but maybe a more kind of a sharing of resources, of these recipes that you guys are coming up with in the trenches that can help more higher level people sort of guide projects down a familiar path, like a yellow brick road, versus always going off into the weeds and chopping with a machete to solve a particular problem.
This comes up every CAP conference. So we really need to create a central repository for this kind of thing. We have the Slack channel, and that is a great resource. I will get all those notifications, so if I can provide useful advice through Slack, I certainly will. It's also sort of the case, if I'm being honest, that I don't want to, I end up, because of time constraints, having to do really things that I would consider really hacky. And I'm not sure that I would advise those as best practice, but I do them. And I'm happy to tell you what they are. So
Why do you do that?
I do them because I need to turn something around really quickly for like a pilot project to pursue a grant, or it doesn't actually matter that this particular part of the thing is performant. I have enough overhead to do it, that kind of thing.
Same here. We'll have to share our hacks sometimes, embarrass ourselves.
Well, they're very context specific, so it's hard to like come up with this particular hack. The matcap shader trick is a really good one.
I feel like if we were like an indie game studio instead of academics, we would just post it on our blog and then be done with it. But in academia, you want to kind of like, make a nice formal publication that's all peer reviewed and everything.
Right.
And that kind of like makes you scared of sharing your hacks,
That's right.
you know?
That's right.
Yeah, that's true too.
But to answer your question, Scott, more directly, already when we were sitting over here preparing for this tech talk, I've already learned something from Kyle, I've learned something from Chris, where we could say, hey, what if we kind of joined paths and found that yellow brick road together? Yeah.
Along those same lines, other than a polished publication, what sort of informal dissemination do you like? Like YouTube tutorials or blog entries? What is your go-to informal way to just empower maybe several students or another institutions, some interns?
I'll go last because I'll be disappointed.
Oh, among students, video tutorials are super popular. I feel like they duplicate a lot of the effort that I would have to do on a one-on-one tutorial, and they do a pretty good job for students. It's not my learning style at all, and I feel like part of the reason I've been successful at things is because I go directly to the API and try to just memorize what the functions are in every single class in there, so that way when I'm trying to solve a problem, I know what the puzzle pieces are. Of course, not everybody can work that way, but sometimes, yeah. Even for a fair amount of open source stuff like FFmpeg, there's stuff that you have to find the right source code, part of the source code, to figure out what the proper flags are. And so digging on it like that is how I do it.
I recently started dabbling in video tutorials for the students, but as to his point about publication, I don't like being judged, so typically I didn't do video tutorials. But I also do a lot of big picture, big circles, the opposite of what you were describing. A student doesn't really care necessarily, or a faculty or staff doesn't really care how something works, they just want it to work. So a lot of times I'll do step by step. If you want to do this, click this button, that button, that button, and that works for most of my clients.
Yeah, I've written some documents like that, but for the most part, I don't generally we have a subscription to Udemy and a bunch of courses there that I will direct students to, but what I'm trying to get them to learn is that it's not any particular skill. It's like drawing. You don't learn to draw an eye or a nose, you learn how to render in general, right? So I'm trying to get them to learn that they can solve those problems by digging through an API, by trying a bunch of things, by banging their head against the wall. I try to use the metaphor. I describe starting an internship at the center as being a learning wall rather than a curve. They just need to smash their heads against it and ask me the same questions 100 times, and it's fine. But I don't do any kind of documentation or distribution, and I probably should.
I might make a quick comment. There's often quite a difference for us between whether we're working with a student and we're trying to develop them as an individual, or whether we're working with a member of faculty and we're writing grants and considering what tools and technologies we're going to that. So we sort of harden and temper the responses and the needs based on whether it's a student in explore mode and is here to learn and is here to be challenged and is here to fail. If we're in service mode, we want to fail less and we want to still experiment part of it well, but succeed more. So that can sometimes radically input how much hats do we share, or how much best practice do we want to wave that flag for. And we just pull out the different cards depending on who the user is and what the needs are. I just realised that all of us are jumping around all those things, which is totally right, it's the right way to be. To try and encourage our students to get into that mode, we run what are called stat sessions every week, which is a show me, teach me, ask me, tell me, 5 minutes. And we try and encourage all the students to do pretty much what the panel are doing now. Whether either tell us something that's gone well, share something that was a disaster, teach us something, so that's a great way to try and figure out if they've learned it, or to ask questions about something that's stuck on them. The more we get the students to do that, the more we find that they're populating either the blog or the Slack channel with all the kinds of content that we're getting out today.
We had a question over there.
I've seen different places offer boot camps. Sometimes it's for their interns or their grad students, but that might be something to consider at a future conference or another appropriate location as a workshop or a boot camp on architectural plan, workflow.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, every university I've encountered over the years has someone like one of our panelists who is kind of the guru at making it work. It's almost like the graphics, rapid prototyping expert. Sometimes you need to do something to decide whether to invest more time and effort in. That's not a easily written down workflow, it's the experience.
Exactly.
And having a lot of tools available to pick and choose from.
I will say we have offered a couple workshops, like when something is really solid, like I've been working a lot with 360 photography and getting that into VR, and I've conducted 2 courses for private industry on how to implement that particular approach. But because the data that comes in is so varied, it's not very often that I have the chance to really refine a pipeline like that.
I think one of the things I just took away from that too, and I'm hearing, it's very specialized skill sets involved with these specific individuals. And so if Kyle went on vacation for a month, went to Hawaii to get some R&R, all of a sudden all work stops in certain workflows. Or if Jeff goes off on vacation, who's going to write the one thing that he does? And that's, I think, as a manager, again, trying to manage resources, that's kind of difficult to do sometimes when we have such a specialized skill set. I'm curious if there are any sort of solutions or thoughts on that particular issue.
Well, the hacky bad workflows also applies to documentation. So I have in pretty much every project a little notes.txt, and I just like write down like some thoughts or why I tried this obvious thing and didn't work it. So it's almost like a little journal on every project. It's very decentralized and unorganized, but I feel like at least it's a paper trail in case I get hit by a bus, you know?
But you're writing that because that's the type of person you are. You if I died and you came in and said, "Oh, what was Jeff doing?" You would look at my notes.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced Scott's going to look at my notes.
Or understand your notes.
Or understand our notes.
It's like someone's Premiere project file. If they go off, you open, it's like, why did they do this? What's going on? Oh, they did provide it, but again, like I'm looking, I guess, at systems of shared resources, of transfer of intellectual ideas, kind of the intern process, something where, again, like all this treasure trove of information isn't just retained on 3 computers right there. Somehow, I guess I'm trying to network you guys together to a bigger picture or to clone you.
So maybe, and this is just a speculation, but maybe it has to do with the fact that we're all in academia. So the turnover is really fast and the teams are really small, of size 1 often. So the kinds of projects that you would generally in the private field see a team of, you'd have someone doing the modeling, and someone doing the texturing, and someone doing the just the animation stuff. We have to do all that stuff, and we have to do it at a really truncated time frame, and that's probably has something to do with the central dilemma, I think.
I feel like having the way relationships are managed with interns is also really important, or other students. Because if it's like a teacher-student style relationship, that's way too formal. And if it's more like a tech support situation, that means they're not going to come to you unless they're really, screw things up, and then they're going to feel bad about it. So I feel like just spending time with students and have it be more almost like a mentor protege kind of relationship. How you can even just talk through the thing that you're doing with them, even if they're not involved with that project, just gives them like a cultural framework of what, best practices are like, or how you solve problems.
Yeah, and that has worked well for us. And our job placement out of that program has been pretty good, but it doesn't exactly solve the manager's dilemma of us disappearing. I guess they could hire the intern in.
One success that we have had recently it was a requirement for the hourly, the intern in this case, to record his workflow as part of his project delivery. And it worked out very well. We've reused that workflow. It's a photogrammetry workflow in this case. And we've reused it hundreds of times, I would say, very successfully. And it's a great workflow. It needs refinement, but now I can hand it off to the next hourly and say, I want you to fix chapter 2. I don't want to use Photoshop. I want to use Image Magic. I want it free.
Yeah, if you're a shop if you do that regularly enough,
It's just one time.
So,
But
well,
we're
but
gonna do
if
it
you-
again.
If you've used it, oh, I mean, like if you've done a photogrammetry process enough
Yeah,
times
yeah.
that it,
Is that mesh room? Or what are you doing?
We're using IDSoft photo scan.
Okay. Sorry,
So,
go ahead.
so following that trail a little bit, so you mentioned the difference between a game design shop, right, and then what we've been doing in academia. And I think that's got a pretty widespread thing. You have one guy who kind of knows everything, and then you have students who are kind of having that turnover all the time once they're finally good enough to really do a lot in Unity or whatever else they're graduating. Do you see any benefit to trying to actually build more of a structure of a game design kind of group within your different groups? Would that be something you can see a benefit in?
I would love that, but yeah, I don't know that I don't know that it'd be possible to facilitate that and do everything else.
Yeah, there's been talk about maybe doing some sort of like track about game development, but I feel like so much of that would be duplicating effort that's already out there for tutorials. And the amount of stuff that I want to do about, say, Unity for biomedical engineering data is small enough that, you know, we could do it. We have done it as like a one semester class, but it's almost like, what kind of prerequisite do you have in order to make that class useful? Because what they want to do with it is pretty complex, but they don't have like a basic Unity knowledge. So we have to start at the bottom for that. So I don't know. It's almost like the problem I have with engineering students is when I was in college, I kind of gave up on gaming so I could concentrate on my degree. And pretty much most students are like that now. And so I can constantly look at other games to solve like how they've solved complex rendering issues, because they do so much stuff on like the actual development side that's really innovative. But students don't even have, they've never, you know, played hardly anything. So they don't even like have that language. They know Paraview, but they've never played any like recent console game in the past 10 years. So it's almost like a cultural problem with that too.
There's so I own the design document books for Wolfenstein and Doom and Quake, you know, and you can look through those and get some really interesting ideas. To your point, I mean, how does God of War render so beautifully right in front of you? Well, because the field of view is really constricted and like stuff is aggressively called, and that tree that loads into the next world, well, that tree, that animation that plays before the next world loads, that's a loading screen. Yeah, those kinds of little insights that you might be right. I don't know. A lot of my interns end up being gamers, but they don't come from engineering very often. So that makes sense. Should we
5 minutes left.
pivot to hardware a little bit? Does anyone?
10 minutes.
Okay.
One comment from earlier discussion, and also just a follow-up question. So Revit workflow, I don't know if anyone's ever tried this walkthrough 3D plugin that exists like on this store. It's free and it'll export. Now it will export to a Unity project for you. So we've had some success with that. EMC bridge.
What was it called?
Walkthrough 3D. Just to throw that out there. We've used it a little bit, and it seems to, now that, at first what it would do is it would just give you an exe that could run on Vive or Oculus, which wasn't so useful all the time, especially if you wanted to like take a Revit scene and try to bring it into Cave. But now it can actually export a Unity project from Revit. So,
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll check that out.
and then just another question I had pertaining to hardware was going from a clustered setup to a single machine multi-GPU setup. Have you run into any issues with stereo across, like stereo functioning correctly across GPUs?
You went.
Yeah, so for performance reasons, there was a big rendering bottleneck if you just take one window that's spread across multiple displays and then try to render to that, because that's such a huge frame buffer that it has to render on one card and then push that to the other cards just to display them. So we still, even though it's a multi-GPU system, we're not using SLI at all. Every display gets its own window. And because, like, say, in my case, the front wall is 4 different displays, I have those 4 displays merged together using Mosaic. So it sees it as just one big window. But then for the side wall, that's a separate window. And so that way, each window is drawn only on one graphics card. And they can have their own separate 3D stereoscopic implementation. So that way they don't interfere with each other. You still need Quadro Sync just to synchronize them all, even though they're all coming from the same computer somehow. So that's silly to me, but that's the main issue. One thing that I've also had an issue with a setup like that is because they're running at different displays, just because the walls are different dimensions each, I couldn't get the Quadro Sync card to generate a master signal all on that same computer. So I had to set up a separate signal generator just to put out a proper genlock for the computer. So I have the old server node from the previous implementation of the cave is still running just to put out a clock signal. And that's all it's doing.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's a hack.
Yeah.
That's essentially what we did as well.
Any other hardware stuff?
These days, as augmented reality requests come through, what sort of tools are you reaching for?
Okay, so when you say augmented reality, do you mean a pass-through display, or do you mean like on a phone, or both?
It's up to you. I mean, I guess it comes down to folks wanting to do augmented reality. What sorts of tools do you reach for that you find to be useful?
Sure. So for mobile devices, ARKit and AR Toolkit, and Unity now has a API that can deploy to both. So that's a pretty straightforward one there. We've had a Magic Leap for some time, but I haven't had time to use it at all. The display is really nice.
I used to use Vuforia for mobile devices, but I've kind of switched to ARKit, mostly just because ARKit is open source. I mean, it's Google, but it's open enough.
Software-wise, we've been using Vuforia as well. Hardware-wise, I'm thinking tablets and phones because I'm not impressed with the HoloLens. I haven't seen the Magic Leap. I think we're not there yet when it comes to head-mounted augmented reality.
The HoloLens it has an impact. There's like a wow factor to it for sure. But I think I agree. I mean, all of the compute has to be built into the headband. It's like running a HoloLens. It's like running a Oculus Go, I suppose, spec-wise. Like it's pretty constrained.
Yeah, I'm on a project right now where we originally had a lot of good funding up front, and so we purchased 5 HoloLenses to be used in a public art gallery. And it actually went awful because the HoloLenses themselves have such a peculiar fit on them with the way the band goes like diagonally as like a halo. And so out of the 5 HoloLenses that we bought, 3 of them broke after like 3 months, and then a 4th one broke recently. And because it's like a developer kit, there's no parts, there's no support, there's no warranty. So I've taken it on myself to like 3D print replacement parts, and it hasn't been great.
Has that worked at all?
Sometimes. I was able to replace 2 of the 4 broken ones, but.
Okay, I might bother you.
Okay, I guess the HoloLens 2 has a better strap, but for me it's weird that the issue is the strap, not any of the actual electronics.
I saw a question there.
What is your experience in automatically converting the point clouds to 3D rendered, 3D mesh rendered?
There's a talk coming up about LiDAR, isn't there, Emma?
That's your talk.
Okay.
I guess the only the one observation I'll make is that it's very difficult to get a reasonable texture out of a point cloud unless it's extremely dense, because those are vertex colors and they end up a big smeary mess. But I don't know what the content of the talk to come is, so I'll step on that.
So one final thought about AR, the solution to the HoloLens problem is that we're now switching it over just to iPads and using ARKit on that. And even though it's like less immersive, it's not stereoscopic or anything, it still has a pretty good user experience from what we've tested so far.
Do you all find that anyone cares about sustainability of these things? You know, after 2 or 3 years of writing something, do people want to be able to still, experience things 5 years down the road, or is taking a screenshot or taking a movie or dumping out an OBJ file the only, steps towards sustaining an experience a decade later?
Well, yes, in fact, I know of one person that's very much interested in the sustainability of projects. What Eric's really talking about is you have a Unity project, let's say Unity goes belly up and they don't exist anymore, and all you have is your Unity file and the executables and maybe the original OBJs. Well, or 3D files that you built it with. Well, how are you going to rebuild that experience? Are you going to rebuild that experience? Do you care to preserve that experience? I don't have a good answer. Haven't had one.
Do users even care about that?
Most of our users.
Do people care about that, or are they just trying to get something, for now and the next 6 months, and then they?
If it's a digital preservation project, then yeah, obviously they care about it, because that's the whole point. So for anything that's 3D scanning digitization, we store in open formats. Even if we use a proprietary scanner format, we store in the open formats several different polygonal decimation levels for online delivery. But when it comes to user experiences, I haven't had that problem as much. Usually it's a student once gets a project done. I just want to show this as my final project, and then I'm going to graduate and go get a job in the industry. You guys?
Well, because my focus is on classroom experiences and education more so than research. If it was research, I would definitely want to have stuff archived and published more. But because my focus is on having memorable classroom experiences, I feel like so much of that is just dependent on how they remember it. I come from a theater background, and most theater shows don't record everything. And so once the run is done, it's perfectly accepted that, it's done. And if people can remember it, if they can have, a formative experience there, that's really all I can hope for.
So we, just anecdotally, when there's a similar focus in my center on classroom experiences, and if they remember those fondly, they're going to ask for them later. And that has kind of bit us a little bit, because we did some architecture changes and a project wouldn't run anymore, but it's still requested. It's been like 5 years. It's still requested. They want to see this campus map project, and I'm not reviving it.
The counterpoint maybe, as an editor of several chemistry or biophysics journals, we have software entries in these journals, and sustainability of software is a big deal. If you can't show that, then you're not going to be able to distribute these programs through these venues. If you just give a GitHub address, that's not enough. And similarly, this is going to get worse in general by NIH and NSF standards, because data sustainability and reproducibility are becoming bigger issues. So you're going to have software that does analysis or does something that is critical to the scientific conduct of a paper. You cannot say, well, 3 years from now, this might be depreciated. I don't care.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
In the old scientific world, where people wrote Fortune 77 programs, it was easy. You could just distribute Fortune 77 source code. We have something now where we have 3D stuff that uses various web interfaces and HTML5, and we're really struggling with how to distribute this. Playing with containers and say, okay, you get this container, but those become obsolete. But this really is not something that you can just ignore in the research area. And this will become more serious over the next few years.
I agree. Yeah, I don't think I'm not aware of a robust solution to that right now. Yeah.
All right, unfortunately, that's the end of our time. Thank you, panelists. Everybody.
Thank you.